So once you've executed your query, you will have another variable containing the resource to the actual result of the operation. If it was an insert, update, drop, or delete operation, then you need only to use the resource variable to ensure that the operation happened. If it was a select query, however, you'll probably need to retrieve the data that was selected. First, for all operations except the select, you can use the resource variable to check to see if the operation was completed. Bear in mind this is not to check whether it was successful or not, just to check whether it was completed or not. We do that by placing the results, which is going to be true or false, into our if. So this says if results is not true, which means if it was not executed, then we're going to print this error. Now this is also a good place to use the MySQL error function, printing it out here so we know exactly what the error was. When you're retrieving data, there are two functions that will allow you to retrieve a row of data. The first is the MySQL fetch row function. This function will return the MySQL data row into an array, with the indexes being 0 to however many number of columns you've retrieved. This is most often used when you only have one or two columns returned, and you know the exact column and order that they were returned in. The other functions that I find more useful than the MySQL fetch row function is the MySQL fetch array function. This function will return the MySQL data row into an array also, but instead of using numeric indexes only, it will return the column names as indexes as well. Now if you want only the column names as indexes, then you can add an argument to the end of the MySQL fetch array called MySQL assoc, which stands for MySQL associated, as in an associative array. This way you can directly reference the column you want to use by name, rather than working with an impersonal number like you get from the MySQL fetch row function. Each of these functions take the resource variable as their argument. That is the resource variable from your MySQL query, not your MySQL connection. So as you've probably guessed, you can only retrieve one row at a time using these functions. If you only have one row to retrieve or only want to retrieve the first row, that works out really well. But if you have more than one row, then you need a way of retrieving all that data. So let's take a look here. If you've only got one row you want to retrieve, you can write your script something like this. Open our database connection and select our database. This is our query selecting where customer ID is 1, so it should only return one row because that's a unique primary key. So we run our MySQL fetch array, so that'll return an array of data into the variable data using our resource res, which is our query resource. And here we've got that argument, which I'll take out for the moment, so you can see how the MySQL fetch array works by default. So you can see here, it's the results of our query. It's gone into the database, selected a row, and it's printing out that row. Now, because we removed that argument, we've got numeric indexes as well as named column references. So if we're now to loop through this in a for each to make an operation on each one, you've got duplicates. That's the same, this is the same, and this is the same. Not a real good situation to be in. So we add that argument back in, refresh, and here we go. Now we've only got the column names as the indexes. So what happens when there's more than one row returned and we want to operate on each one of those rows? Well, at this point we need to loop. And we'll just comment this code out and uncomment our multiple row retrievals. So what we're doing here again is a query where we're going to select all the data from the customer info with no conditions. So that'll return every row in that table. Now what we do is we drop into a loop here, and then we're going to print out the results of that MySQL fetch array every time we loop through. The while loop is going to continue through as long as there is data returned in the data variable. When there are no more rows left to retrieve from the resource link, the data variable becomes empty, aborting the while loop. This is a standard way that I use everywhere to retrieve rows of data. In most cases, I'm using the data right within the loop, but if you need it outside of the loop, you can copy the data into another variable, or even create a multidimensional array of the data to use outside of the loop. So we'll take a quick look at the results of this. There we have our first row, our second row data, and our third row data. So there's your basic method of retrieving MySQL data in PHP. In our next movie, I'll review a few other useful PHP functions that are related to MySQL.